My father's overprotectiveness almost destroyed our relationship, but together we overcame it. When my mother passed away, a sense of emptiness overwhelmed me in a way I never thought possible. It wasn't just her loss itself, but the impact on my father. He was completely lost. I watched a strong man who had always been my rock become someone completely different, someone incapable of dealing with his own grief. He began to treat me as if I were made of glass, as if anything could shatter. My essence, the fear of losing another person he loved, consumed him completely. I wanted to understand, I wanted to embrace that fear, but at the same time, I felt suffocated by it. I wanted the freedom to live my life, to move forward, but he wouldn't let me. Always there with every move, with that look of constant concern. And the more he tried to protect me, the more I felt I was losing something fundamental, my own autonomy. The days became more difficult, each one carrying a greater dose of tension. I couldn't leave the house without him questioning me about every detail, about every person I met. It wasn't out of malice, I know. It was just fear, the fear of losing myself, like I'd lost my mother. I was beginning to feel trapped in a cage, where my father was the only one who held the key, but he wouldn't use it to free me. I didn't want to hurt him, but at the same time, I felt myself fading away. With every question he asked, with every control disguised as concern, I felt smaller. I no longer knew who I was, or at least I didn't know who I was becoming. I found myself in a dark place, where his love, though genuine, was consuming me. I tried to talk to him about it. I tried to explain that I didn't need this constant vigilance, that I was capable of taking care of myself, of making my own decisions. But all he would say was, "I just want to protect you. I don't know what I would do if I lost you too." And that broke my heart, because deep down, I knew he wasn't doing it to trap me. He was just trying to hold on to what was left, trying to control what he could, since the rest of his life felt so out of control. But I couldn't go on living like this. I knew that if I didn't find a way to free myself from this situation, I would end up losing myself. I needed to show my father that despite his pain, I could move forward. I needed him to understand that by letting me fly, he wasn't losing me. The turning point came one night when he was waiting for me again. I'd gone out to dinner with friends, and as always, he texted me repeatedly, asking where I was, what I was doing, and who I was with. When I got home, I found him sitting in the kitchen, his expression serious. He didn't look me in the eye, as if afraid I'd see him as weak, but it was in that moment that I made a decision. I looked at him and said, "Dad, I know you're scared, but I need to live my life. I need to step away for a while, or I'll lose myself in this fear." He was silent for a while, just watching me. Then he simply said, "I just want you to be happy, daughter, but teach me to let go. Teach me to trust you." And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew it was time to start showing my father that I was capable of walking alone. The following days were challenging, not because he directly opposed me, but because his fear was still there, constantly, in the small actions. The worried looks, the words he didn't say. He didn't stop me from going out or making my own choices, but somehow he still tried to keep me close. I began to understand that his process of liberation was also gradual. It was an adjustment for both of us. He was still afraid of losing me, and I still felt the pain of my mother's absence. But we were beginning to find a balance. I began to show myself stronger, to trust my own choices more. What struck me most about this process was realizing that by freeing myself, I was also freeing him. He began to see that by supporting and trusting me, he wasn't letting me go, but simply allowing me to grow. This in some way brought us closer than ever. It was during this phase that he began to show more interest in doing the things he enjoyed again. He started going for walks with friends, playing the guitar, something he hadn't done since my mother passed away. Little by little, the house became lighter. The silence of grief was replaced by deeper conversations and even laughter. The process wasn't quick nor easy, but it was real. My father was learning to trust again, to not live in such fear. He still gave me advice, and even though I was an adult, I sometimes felt I still needed his guidance. But something had changed. The dynamic between us was more balanced. He no longer felt so responsible for my happiness. He began to realize that his happiness lay within me too, but it didn't depend on his control. And I began to realize that by trusting him, I was also allowing him to be happy again. The moment that definitively marked this change was when he called me, excited, to tell me he'd met a woman named Elisa. I was surprised, not because he didn't deserve to be happy again, but because I never imagined he'd open up to anyone after my mother's death. At first, I was cautious. I didn't want her to be a replacement for my mother, but seeing the sparkle in his eyes when he talked about her, I realized that pain doesn't erase love. He was allowing himself to love again, and in a way, I was learning from him. When he asked me to meet Elisa, I went with an open heart. I didn't want to judge her. I wanted to understand if she was truly good for him, if she was what he needed at that moment. And over time, I realized she brought something he needed, lightness. She wasn't trying to replace anyone, she simply brought new energy to his life, and that made all the difference. I began to understand that by allowing my father to experience a new love, he wasn't exchanging me, he wasn't leaving me aside. He was simply allowing life to move on. And seeing his happiness alongside her, I also found peace. It was a process of acceptance, but also of gratitude. Gratitude for him having taught me that love doesn't have to be possessive, that it can be free, healthy, and transformative. I, on the other hand, was also learning to give myself permission to be happy, to follow my own path, to make my own choices without fear. And this, as simple as it may seem, was a crucial turning point in my life. I realized I didn't have to choose between him and my freedom. I could have both in a balanced way, with respect and love. And it was at that moment that I felt truly free. Seeing my father and Elisa together, growing closer, I began to reflect on my own life. I had closed myself off to relationships, afraid to love and get involved with someone. I always thought I might lose my freedom, or lose myself in the other person, as I saw happening with my father. But observing them both, I realized that love doesn't have to be a prison. It doesn't have to be a relationship of control, but of partnership. I learned that when love is healthy, it strengthens you, frees you, and doesn't imprison you. This changed the way I related to the people around me. I began to open up more, to trust, to allow myself to be loved without fear of losing my essence. I was learning from my father's story to love without constraints, to give myself permission to be happy. The turning point in my life, and I believe in my father's as well, was the day we sat down together to talk about the future. It was a peaceful afternoon, an afternoon when he, with Elisa by his side, began to talk about how he finally felt at peace. He told me, "I never imagined I could love again. But more than that, I never imagined I could let someone love me without fear." That phrase stayed with me for days. I knew he was talking about love, but he was also talking about life. He taught me in that moment that true overcoming lies not only in moving forward, but also in learning to allow love in, even when the scars seem too great. He showed me that love can heal, can transform, can give strength when all seems lost. I began to apply this new vision of love to all areas of my life. My father's overcoming wasn't just about him learning to let me go. It was about him learning to allow himself to live again. And that's what taught me to free myself from the fear I carried. I lived with the fear that by opening myself up to the world, I would end up losing myself, just as he had lost himself before. But seeing his happiness and the trust he had in Elisa, I realized that trust, both in myself and in others, is the key to living freely. By letting go of the shackles of fear, I realized that I too could live life with more ease, more confidence, without having to worry about what I might lose. The first time I attended his wedding was a surreal moment. I was happy, of course, but also emotional in a way I hadn't imagined. Not because he was getting married, but because he was doing something I never thought I'd see. He was giving himself a chance to be happy, to start over. He was doing this not for me, but for himself. And that, in a way, made me reflect on all the times I'd been controlled by the fear of loss. I, too, needed to start giving myself a chance to be happy, to start over. At the wedding, as he and Elisa danced their first dance, I looked at them and saw something beyond just a couple. I saw their transformation. I saw the love that truly liberates, not the one that binds. The following months were a time of adjustment for all of us, but a healthy one. The most important thing was seeing how my father was rebuilding himself step by step, and how I was finally finding myself again. I started traveling more, getting involved in new projects, having the experiences I'd always wanted. I was allowing myself to. I was choosing for myself what I never imagined possible. I saw my father start to do the same. He started going out more, going back to doing things he loved, like playing the guitar, which he hadn't done since my mother's time. With each small change in him, with each step he took to reconnect with his own happiness, I felt my own life becoming lighter. And that's how I understood that overcoming adversity isn't something you do alone. True overcoming comes when you learn to allow love, support, and trust in others. Over time, my relationship with my father transformed completely. We started talking about everything: the past, the future, the mistakes we'd made, and what we'd learned. In one of these conversations, he said to me, "You showed me that I don't need to be afraid of losing you to see you happy." And I, in turn, learned that I can be happy again without having to replace anyone. I heard that with a heart full of gratitude. Because in those words, I understood what overcoming truly means. It's not about forgetting what happened, but about learning to live with it. Overcoming is accepting, it's transforming pain into strength, and he had learned that. And so had I. With each passing day, I felt my father becoming more independent, more joyful. He found balance, and this balance was reflected in me too. I began to realize that just like him, I could also pursue happiness without fear of loss. I didn't need to sacrifice my freedom to please or worry someone. I needed, in fact, to learn to live for myself, to trust that I could be well, even in moments of transition. And that's what allowed me to find a new path full of opportunities and new learning. I also learned to trust myself more in my choices, in my right to be happy. When I began to truly open myself to new experiences without the burden of fear of losing something or someone, it was as if a new world opened up before me. I traveled to new places, met incredible people, and learned that life is about new beginnings. My father, now married and happier, supports me in a different way. He no longer has that control. He gives me space, but with affection, with a look of pride. His gaze today is that of a father who sees his daughter ready to live, who sees his daughter capable of following her own path. This gave me even more courage to move forward, to allow myself to live without limitations. Today, looking at my father and seeing the man he has become fills me with joy and pride. He found in Elisa the love he so desperately sought. He also found himself, his strength, his courage to move forward. And I, in turn, found the freedom to be who I truly am, without fear of losing what was no longer mine. I learned that often what holds us back is not a lack of love, but the fear of loss. Overcoming it means learning to live with this fear, but without letting it define our choices. I learned that it is possible to be free, even within a relationship, and this is something my father and I learned together. And that, for me, is the greatest gift. The most beautiful thing about this whole process was seeing my father rediscover his love for himself. He was no longer lost. He had found a new perspective on life. Seeing this happen, I began to give myself permission to do the same. I no longer needed to be afraid. I could go beyond what I had ever imagined. I could own my own story, be happy without constraints, without the fear of loss. I no longer needed to sacrifice my happiness to please someone else, because I knew that whoever truly loved me would love me freely. And that, for me, is true overcoming, the freedom to be who you truly are. And at the end of it all, I realized that the pain I felt at the beginning, the sense of loss, was a catalyst for transformation. It led me to a place of introspection where I realized I couldn't control anyone's actions, but I could control my own life. I couldn't change the past, but I could decide how I would live the present and the future. This learning of not clinging to the past, of letting go of what no longer serves me, gave me a new outlook on life. I'm grateful for everything I've been through, for everything I've learned, because today I'm a stronger, freer, more peaceful person. Today, my father and I have a different, more mature, more balanced relationship. And I realize he no longer has that fear. He sees me as a woman capable of living her life, of making her own choices. He sees me as someone who is always by his side, but who has her own path. And that, for both of us, is the greatest victory. Because in the end, overcoming grief isn't just about living without the weight of pain. It's about learning to live with it and moving forward, making the best choices for yourself. The change in my father's relationship with me wasn't magical. It wasn't instantaneous. It came gradually, with small actions, with conversations that happened naturally. He began to understand that his love no longer suffocated me, that his trust in me didn't mean he would lose me. And I began to realize that despite all the difficulties, he was also getting back on his feet, finding his new path. Our story together became stronger, healthier, more authentic. I saw my father starting to live again, and with that, I also found myself feeling lighter, more willing to move forward with my own life. What touched me most about this whole process was realizing that our pain, though painful, led us on a journey of transformation. I learned that instead of allowing ourselves to be consumed by suffering, we can use it to strengthen us. We can indeed overcome difficult times because they teach us more than the easy ones. In the end, our greatest lesson was releasing fear. The fear of losing someone, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of not being ready. Overcoming fear is a gradual process, but by learning to trust, by learning to allow space for others to be who they are, it is possible to take the first step toward freedom. Today, my father and I talked about how our relationship has changed. He looks at me with genuine pride, and I look at him with the same admiration. He's become a happier, more open man, and in a way, he taught me that it's not just through control that we can protect those we love. True love lies in giving space, in trust. He began to live again, to allow himself to be happy, and that gave me more courage to move forward with my own life. It was no longer a mutual fear that held us back, but a solid trust built over time. The truth is, no one is free from making mistakes. None of us are perfect, but what we learn from those mistakes is what truly shapes us. With each step my father took to free himself from the fear of losing me, I felt a transformation within myself as well. I went from being the daughter who depended on his protection to the woman who could walk beside him, but with autonomy. This doesn't mean I stopped loving or needing him. It just means I learned to be strong enough to take care of myself, to trust my own judgment, to not live in the shadow of fear. It was a long process, but in the end, it was worth every step. I was able to show my father that I didn't need constant protection, that I could fend for myself. And he, in turn, learned that by letting me be who I am, he wouldn't lose me. On the contrary, he would gain me in a truer, deeper way. The love that existed between us grew stronger, but in a way I never thought possible, without control, without pressure, only with respect and trust. That's when I understood that the greatest gift we can give another is trust. And when you truly trust, you don't need to control. I moved on with my life, left home, traveled, and began to get more involved in things I'd always wanted to do. My father, in turn, also began to open himself up to new experiences. He traveled with Elisa, made new friends, and resumed old hobbies he'd neglected. This taught me a lot about how transformative love is. It's not about finding someone to fill the void, but about allowing life to unfold. My father and I understood deeply that love is much more than the need to control or hold back. Love is freedom. Love is trust. Love is a constant choice to support another without fear. Over time, I realized that the biggest obstacle we faced was fear. Fear of loss, fear of not being enough, fear of living without the other. But true freedom comes when we learn to overcome this fear, when we can look at the other person and see them for who they are, without trying to change them, without trying to control their destiny. This applies to any relationship, friendship, love, family, and over time I learned that true connection happens when two people in their individuality choose to support each other. My father and I did this. We supported each other, but with the confidence that each had their own path to follow. Looking back, I see how necessary it all was. The pain, the frustration, the difficult conversations, the tears. It was all part of the process. We can't avoid pain, but we can choose how it shapes us. And the pain of losing my mother brought me here, brought me to my father on a new, deeper and truer level. At the same time, he showed me that we can reinvent ourselves, that life goes on, even after loss, even after suffering. He taught me that happiness isn't something that comes from outside. Happiness is within us. It's in how we choose to live. Today, when I look at my father and see the man he has become, I admire him in a way I never imagined possible. He found love again, but more importantly, he found himself. He allowed himself to live again, unfettered by fear, and in doing so, he taught me that I too can be free, that I too can choose my own path. We both learned that true love is not about control. True love is about freedom, and that is what we ultimately found in each other, the freedom to be who we are, to love fully and truly. I know life won't always be easy, that we'll still have challenges ahead. But looking at what we've been through, I know we can overcome anything, together or apart, but always with the same respect, the same trust. Love doesn't imprison us, it frees us. And I finally managed to find my freedom. My father found his too. And in the end, we're both stronger, happier, and more complete than we ever imagined possible. This is what overcoming is: learning, growing, and allowing love in all its forms to set us free.